afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our panel, Delivering Content Where, When, and How Customers Need It. I'm Tess Mercer from Dun & Bradstreet. I'm the leader of marketing technology. Before I forget, please fill out the survey on your chairs. Make sure you get a blue sticker from Rolando. He's in the back there with the camera. And then come back to the D&B booth at 4 p.m. this afternoon for the drawing. And you could be eligible to win the, is it a Bose speaker? Is that what that is? I think that's what that is. Great, so let's get started. Let's start down the line.
Sure. So, introduce myself. I'm Julian Ostrow, Senior Director of Products at Sugar CRM, a customer relationship management company. Been working with D&B and others closely, but really what I'm going to be focusing on is how to surface the customer content in the right way in the context of a sales or support cycle. So taking data from outside, combining that, aggregating that with data inside, and surfacing the right thing at the right time inside of your CRM.
I'm Alex Rosenberg, Senior Director of New Products and Corporate Development at Find the Best, which is a research engine. So I've been with Find the Best for 3 years and helped spearhead our partnership with Dun & Bradstreet.
Hello, everybody. This is Vimal Vail, Vice President of Partner Strategy at D&B. So we focus on partnering with some of our workflow solution providers as well as vertical market solution partners in monetizing content in new and different ways.
Great. So let's get started. The first section is what is content. So it's been said that content is information combined with the experience of consuming the information in a way that delivers value. I'd like to start by asking each of you how you define what content is in the context of your business and solution set.
Sure. So in the context of CRM, it's pretty obvious, right? We're talking about customer data, prospect data at the start. But the traditional challenge in CRM that I've noticed, and I'm sure we're going to touch on this later more in depth, is really dirty data, current data. We realize that as a CRM system, we are not the only system out there. They have ERP, they have their own data warehouses, let alone the kind of data that they want to be bringing in to update, to improve, to get the best content when they need it. So content to us is a combination of intelligence in terms of what should a sales rep be doing next, right? Which deals should they be focusing on? Another example being in customer support, when somebody dials up, how quickly we can surface the current situation that's going on, what cases do they have open, are they due up for renewal, for example. It's really about who you're speaking to, who you should be speaking to next, and the best approach to keep that customer happy on your side.
So Find the Best, we're a research engine. We've got 27 million visitors a month to our site, so we're servicing our content to lots of consumers and businesses about 27 million times every month. The way we define content is it's all the data and tools that someone needs to research with confidence across any topic. And so you kind of need both. You need both really good, accurate, highly structured data with context around what that data means. You know, what is 8 hours of talk time? Is that a good or bad? You know, is a dog's lifespan of 14 years, is that long or short? But then also tools that consumers use and businesses use to filter, rank, sort, and make sense of the information. So content is both that raw data file, but also all of the user experience layered on top of it, so that people can derive value from it outside of just a raw data file.
So people always ask us where value is created when you think of content and data. A couple of things you should keep in mind. One is the traditional value drivers for content were based on things like volume, right? Quality of information or variety of information. How can you aggregate the most content and then deliver it to somebody? It changes when you put content in context, right? So where value gets created is when you can put that content in the context of, as Julian mentioned, a workflow, right? Or, as Ash was saying, in the context of someone doing a specific research, right? So finding that specific piece of content that's relevant to the user. That's the point where the biggest amount of value is created, where content becomes insight, and that makes data more predictive rather than just a utility, right? So we've moved away from thinking of content as just data or information, and moving more towards making it more insight and analytics and just making data more predictive.
So, Vimal, as a follow-on, do you see customers putting more of a premium on certain kinds of content, since we're talking about the value of content?
Yes, so it's a great question. There's, as I mentioned, the point where content or data becomes predictive is where customers attach the most value. So traditionally, we've collected information of many types. We've indexed it, we catalog it, we maintain it, we maintain the quality of it. What we've realized is the part where you can build analytic models based on user data, usage data, and different types of content sources, then you have the ability to give customers visibility to how something will look in the future, right? So I'll use the example of a company. It's not just enough for you to know, who is this company, how many employees work there, and what line of business they're in. It's really helpful to know if they're poised for growth or decline. It's really important to know if they are likely to buy your product or your service, because as a salesperson, at the end of the day, that's the information you care the most about, right? And that kind of information comes from analytic capabilities rather than just informational capabilities. So our customers are assigning much more importance to those analytic capabilities associated with content.
Julian, what about you? You talked a little bit about it in your, with the first question, but what about you in your area? What's the value of content within the Sugar CRM platform?
Right, so I touched on that a little bit first, but and we're kind of hitting the same themes across the three of us, but I'll take a couple examples that are specific to CRM. Some of the challenges with CRM traditionally is that, at least from the individual perspective, and any of you out there who have to use one, the point is, the feeling today is that you have to use one. And so the approach that we're taking, what Sugar's trying to do, is that this is not something you're doing for your manager. This is something that you actually want to be in there. So there's two ways to look at it. There's accessibility to content that drives efficiency for you. So let's say the difference between me spending 5 minutes entering contact data so that my boss doesn't hit me with a stick, right? Versus typing somebody's email address and bam, it's filled out. That's just saving time, right? So you get accuracy out of that. But the other layer coming at it from the other end, even though it's really the same kind of content from the same kind of providers, is exactly what Vimal was touching on, is where is my customer poised? Where are they positioned? Should I really be targeting this renewal? Should they just get a big acquisition? Is it time to go try to do a cross-sell or an upsell? These kinds of things, the distance between the kind of content that we're delivering in CRM today and the kind of intelligence and analytics that these two are touching on, we are so close. And it's time to really try to bring those together and marry those into a user experience that actually makes people want to use something like CRM. So we're almost there, I'll put it that way.
Great. And then Alex, you look at content perhaps the most broadly of our panelists. What have you learned about the relative value of different kinds of content?
Yeah, so at Find the Best we have 2,000 topics. So a topic for us is smartphones or companies or real estate. We have 1 billion things or entities. So Dun & Bradstreet is an entity in our database. Marissa Meyer is an entity in our database, so is the iPhone 5S. We have 100 billion data points about those things, more than 100 billion data points. And so we look very broadly, and I think we spend a lot of time thinking about what defines an entity, what defines Dun & Bradstreet the company, or Sugar CRM the company, in our company research topic. And so it's not just one silo of data, right? It's not just firmographic details about Sugar CRM, knowing that they've got 50 to 200 employees and less than $500 million in revenue. It's there's signal about these companies across a variety of other databases. So looking at things like what's that company's presence in public records? Do they do contracts with the federal government? Who are their employees and what backgrounds are they from? What schools did they attend? There's all this data about Sugar CRM or Dun & Bradstreet that exists across seemingly unrelated topics. And to really derive and create a lot of value for a user, we try and bring all that stuff into the picture. We've never had a user say this is too broad or this is too deep in terms of information about an individual topic. They're always asking for more information, more data. And a lot of that actually comes from the breadth of content suite that we have at Find the Best. And we just see it over and over again. What makes a company a company? What makes a house a home? It's not just beds and baths. It's not just square footage for that house. It's what are the public schools like in that school district? What's the weather like? Is this house at risk for disaster, for flood? Do you have to get insurance for that? And that stuff is seemingly unrelated, but you need to bring everything into the picture because people want to know everything.
And to follow on that a little bit, can I assume that the more that you know about the person using your system, right, to derive that kind of intelligence, use the example of, did the VP of sales go to Stanford or not, right? Is that relevant because I went to Stanford, right? We can make that kind of connection. And so gathering that information from the person using your system and kind of finding the overlap, I guess.
Yeah, we don't do as much of that yet, although that's the ideal, right? You want the data to react to you because our content's often telling a story, and we want that story to be very relevant to whoever's reading, kind of the choose your own adventure story. And so what we do now is a little bit more rudimentary, but gets the trick, which is just ask people to filter. Right? Like, what school did you go to? What kind of car are you looking for? What kind of enterprise are you looking to research or diligence? And so even though it's an additional step for the user on the site, they're usually more than willing to provide that information on the fly, and then the experience becomes immediately tailored to their own research process. But eventually we want to know, hey, Julian worked at Sugar CRM, he probably knows a lot about software as a service, went to the following school, managed the following people, and be able to surface that and tailor the content to your own unique context. So that's kind of find the best 2.0.
Great, thank you. Any questions on that piece? Great. So moving along here, we're going to talk about content from where. So let's talk about sourcing data. Each of your companies is dependent on thousands of sources of data. So let's start with you, Vimal. How do you continuously source new data, and how do you care for data accuracy and timeliness?
So this is the challenge for all content providers, right? It's not just an aggregation problem. If the only problem you have to solve for is sourcing the information, there are a number of people who can do it extraordinarily well. What's important is what comes after you've sourced the content, right? Which is being able to maintain that content, being able to update the content. And if you're able to do it for yourself as a content provider, you can then deliver those same capabilities to customers or the end users. So the way, so we have a process around how we collect and maintain data. So we call it DUNS right, and it anchors around using a unique identifier called the DUNS number. But the most important thing is not the number itself, but it's the information you can attach to that DUNS number associated with an entity. Right? So there's a sourcing problem followed by an integration problem, and then followed by a delivery problem. All of those three problems are tightly coupled to each other.
Great. Now, Julian, how do you deal with that challenging issue of data accuracy and integrity? How do you get customers to trust and use the data you provide in Sugar?
Right, so fortunately we don't have to entirely.
For you.
Only to a degree, because some friends of ours actually took care of part of that problem, but it is only one piece of the picture, even though it's a very important one. Putting it together, CRMs have traditionally been a hub, one way or another, right? Most of your sales force, really anybody that should be interacting with the customer should be using the CRM system. So imagine the other systems in even a medium-sized company of 500 to 1,000 employees. It's not just Sugar or Dynamics or Salesforce sitting there. You've got other internal systems, you've got fresh data coming in from sources like D&B, for example, and you've got what's being entered by the people themselves using the system. So how to get people to trust that? It's been a problem traditionally that things get out of date. And the real problem in terms of surfacing something new like a D&B connector, for example, is that if you mess up the first time, you're pretty well screwed, right? The first time that something really goes wrong based on bad or outdated data or even missing data, people are very unlikely to trust it again. And so taking your time, letting somebody like the administrator tailor what kind of data is showing up for what kinds of users, and really being able to collect their own feedback, right? So this is kind of what I touched on when I was asking you about that. The simple thumbs up, thumbs down. Was this what you were looking for, right? You see that in knowledge bases and FAQs. Getting that kind of feedback, collecting it as people go, getting like a trust rating or something, and really reacting and improving based on that. It's about making a really good guess the first time, letting people tailor it the best they can without making that too broad, and then really figuring out, how did that go for you? How can we continue to improve? So it's about keeping trust, and you really have to do that the first time.
Great. And Alex, what about you? Any challenges?
Yeah, I think the one great advantage that a company like Sugar CRM or D&B has that Find the Best does not have is that you have this touch point with your customers where you're able to explain the data. Right? If someone sees something someone from our sales organization looks at D&B data and sees, hey, this isn't the right CEO, or this data is a little bit out of date, I can then have a conversation with that person and say, well, it was updated 2 months ago. We're about to get another refresh. Just give me some time, and I can kind of win trust back. But when you have 27 million people a month coming to your site, they're on our site, anywhere from 10 seconds to 30 minutes. I don't really have an opportunity to talk to them. So they're going to form their opinion on us based on that first initial interaction with our data. So if it's wrong, we completely burn trust. And then they have this habit of telling everyone about it too. So data quality, even though our consumers don't necessarily need the same level of precision as like a Fortune 1000 type customer for Dun & Bradstreet, they actually are far less forgiving because I can't talk to them. So data quality is really, really important to us. And what we found actually is we can't always be perfect about data quality. We always go with the market leader when we can, in any market. We always try and source data from the best folks, the most authoritative. We go to public record. We do some of our own data aggregation and sourcing. And we also ask our users and people to do thumbs up, thumbs down, or supply their own edits. But you can't be still when you've got a billion things, and you're just unlikely to be perfect with every single entity. So what we do is we try and be really transparent about where the data came from. And that's really helped helpfulness on our site. So for example, we had this problem with our company research product that our partners at D&B heard a lot about, where people were coming to our site and not finding a phone number for some of our businesses. We've got tens of millions of businesses, and a very, very small subset of them don't have a phone number. And so they were just complaining. They were just ripping us, in customer service requests. And we dug into the issue, and it really is that a lot of these businesses don't have a phone number. They just don't. It does not exist. And so what we started doing is we started surfacing a quote saying, listen, we have 27 million phone numbers in our database. This is one of the companies where we don't have a phone number. Click here to edit to actually provide that phone number if you know it, and if not, we're sorry. And helpfulness actually rose, I think, something like 40% that day when we just made a really quick change where we're transparent with our users. So a lot of it's not just about getting the data right, but also showing where the data came from. People want to know where it came from.
Just one thing I'll add to what Julian was saying, which is it's not just about showing the data to the salesperson using the application, right? It's important to understand what is their workflow, the sequence of steps they go through as part of their workflow, and then surfacing the right data at the right points in time, right? So it's important to understand when a lead becomes an opportunity, becomes an account, and then surface targeted data sets that are relevant to that user at the right points in time.
Let's talk about stricter data privacy laws. How's that globally? It's become strict. How's that impacting your ability to collect and use data, if any at all? Is there any impact?
There is, and I'll take an example of some of the German data privacy laws that have come up over the last few years. Anybody in the business world has probably at least encountered those one way or another. So a very large customer of ours wanted to essentially have a series of hubs, at least one on every continent, because the CRM was being used globally. The problem was they have a sales office in Germany. They have thousands of people using the system in Germany. And up to this point, we've had to deal with this with just really complicated architecture. Using that law as an example, you can't even have German customer data in memory in a server in North America, right? It can't even go across the wire. Even if you're using, a MySQL database or something, and literally, nothing's ever being stored. This isn't RAM, right? That's not okay. They will catch you. The customer will not accept it. And so there are a couple ways to get around that. What we've been focusing on, because we don't want to stay with the complicated architecture side of things, is really around certification. Because to a certain degree, if you get the right set of certifications put together, it's timely, it's expensive, it takes forever to fill these things out. It is a good way to drive your own infrastructure to where it needs to be. But that's the one way that we're focusing on it right now. And things will continue to get stricter in some areas, and so there need to be other ways to work with that, not just work around it in terms of architecture. So don't have all the answers, but hopefully these two guys do.
No.
It's a problem that's probably going to grow as regulation increases in each of these markets, right? So we have two problems. One is there's market-specific regulation, which for a content provider, you now have to manage through regulation compliance in multiple markets, right? So how you manage people information in the context of business, right? So not even consumer data. This is just people in the context of a business, you in your capacity. That's a fairly easy data asset to manage in the United States, right? Not even North America, just in the United States. When you go to Canada, it gets a little more complicated. When you go to Europe, it gets much more complicated. So the era of looking at data as one homogeneous database is gone. Right? That's from a content provider perspective. Then you look at workflow solution providers, you look at application providers. So all of those use cases now have to grapple with this challenge of accessing data from disparate sources that are constrained by different regulation, and then surfacing it in different markets that are also constrained by different regulations. So that's not an answer to the question. It's more just this is a challenge that we all have to grapple with.
Great. Any questions before we move along? Great. So the next section is customer content experience. So let's start with Alex. How do you put content in front of customers in the most valuable way? And what have you learned about how your customers consume content?
Yeah, so a bunch of things to say on that topic. I guess the first thing that we found as we were developing our site, we launched 4 years ago, is we tried to think about abstracting the research process to a set of kind of unique steps that are similar across topics. And what we found is that our kind of research models rely, consistently similar across topics, where, and that actually translates to essentially 3 page types on our site. We only have 3 page types. We have a search results page where someone can find and filter information. We have a compare page where people can compare 2 topics, two entities side by side, and then a detail page where you want to see all the information about a given entity in one place. And so that model itself actually doesn't change topic to topic, just the data changes, right? So how you decide on what dog to buy is actually very similar to how you decide what home to live in, or how to buy construction management software. So we found that once we kind of discovered that the information retrieval and research process was consistent, it became easy to design a site. And then we just started asking users and learning a lot more about them. What drives happiness, what drives satisfaction with our site, and we were really surprised. A lot of our initial assumptions were wrong. So we started with wanting to provide people with quick and informed decisions. And turns out people don't want to make decisions quickly. When they're on our site, even though they're researching what car to buy or what construction management software suite to buy, they're not thinking about themselves as making a decision. They're thinking about doing research. And we were worried about information overload. And we've not had one complaint from any user about information overload. Information overload is a problem, at least in our business, we all worry about for other people, but never personally experience ourselves. What people really want is they want all the information. They want as much exhaustive data as possible on any given topic that they can get their hands on. They want all the control and tools to filter, rank, and sort that information. And they want all the context around that data. So not just, Dun & Bradstreet has 2,000 employees. 2,000 employees. But is that big? Is that big for the industry? Is that big for the Short Hills area? Is Marissa Meyer's compensation high or low? How does it compare to other female executives in IT? So all the data, all the control, and all the context. Once we started just kind of letting it rip and giving people as much information as they wanted, again, we saw even higher rates of user satisfaction on our site.
That's interesting. I was at the Google Think B2B last week, and one of the tidbits that they shared was, on average, when users are researching, they initiate eight points before they actually will stop researching one certain topic. So it certainly ties into what you're saying. that
Yeah, I
people are
mean-
researching as they're consuming content and not necessarily looking to make a decision right away.
Yeah, it was totally counterintuitive, right? Because you hear information overload. You hear, I just want it all in one place. I want quick and informed decisions. No, you want to take your time when you're buying a car. When you're deciding where to go to college or send your kid to college, you're going to take a lot of time. Verify the information comes from a lot of different places. And even for seemingly smaller purchase decisions like a smartphone, people spend, at least for me, I spend hours and hours of time, way too much time, researching my options across sites. Now I use Find the Best. It's all as I used to.
Julian, let's move over to you. So a big part of the value prop of Sugar CRM is finding everything relevant to one customer or prospect in one place. How do you aggregate data so customers don't have to do that work?
Yeah, very good question. So we're not done with that, and we're never done. Like I've mentioned a couple times, think of 3 distinct categories of the kind of data that's going to be hubbed together in Sugar. It's data that exists in other systems that you're already using. So think of your ERP, think of if you're using a separate help desk or knowledge base. So start with that. Data in the CRM itself, and then external data. So bringing things in from D&B, bringing things in from Find the Best eventually. We exchange cards after the panel. Aggregating that is an interesting challenge. And we're really never going to be done because things change. But I want to take a minute and explain a little bit about where we are in the industry and why it's a little bit less about the feedback of how we should be doing it and a little bit more of us actually sitting down and just honestly thinking for a little while, which we rarely have a chance to do in this industry, unfortunately. So CRM-wise, like I was saying, they're regarded as a tool, basically a half-pretty front end to a database that sales reps are beaten down into entering data into, so that their managers, don't whip them. The thing is, sales flows and support flows have not changed significantly, and they're not likely to, right? How well you do at it, however, can change based on what you know. And so it's less about listening to feedback. It's a little bit more about guessing and trying to provide the right kind of data, like Vimal was highlighting, at the right time in their flow. We know what people are doing, right? Prospects come in, you want to filter and find the best one, you want to assign them to the right people, they make the initial call, they go through the sales cycle, they initially try to resell them, begin supporting them. That's not likely to change for a long time, but the question is, who are you going after next? How can you most effectively support them and really make efficient use of everybody's time? How can you automate the most, right? How can you make sure that the right thing is right there on the screen immediately when somebody calls up? So feedback will be important, but really with the processes being somewhat static, we're just trying to improve the experience within said processes, and that's really where we're focusing for now.
How do you get feedback?
A number of ways, actually. So my inbox is one. Email address has been published quite a bit. We actually recently just added in-application feedback for the first time. So we put out 2 things at the same time in our intelligence pane on the right-hand side, help and instructions and a tour, but also right there under that, a feedback, which actually does go directly to my inbox and gets spread around where it needs to. So there are a number of channels. It's a good thing to highlight because this is a challenge of mine, something I'm actually meeting about with my team later today. Not even the product we provide, but us, Sugar CRM, actually getting the right data about our customers and processing said feedback. It's coming in conversations outside, all the way over to that feedback coming from the application directly. Everything in between, our bug portal, who is that coming from, right? The problem is there are 8 or 10 places where that is. If we took the time, we could probably do a decent job, and every step you take at aggregating and filtering down and getting the most important on the top helps. But the kind of tools that are out there to take just about anything and plug it into something that you already have that's aggregated, that has intelligence attached to it, that's not quite there yet. And so we're ready to go in with partners that have set data and really innovate in terms of what we actually put out as a product to people. I'll use that myself.
That's great. So, Vimal, earlier you talked about using the DENS number and helping customers and partner aggregate data using that. So the question for you is, has technology helped customers use this aggregation capability more seamlessly or made it harder?
Technology definitely helps. It's the challenge is that the volume of information that you're now dealing with has also just exploded. So I'll use a simple example. There's in the past, when you thought of delivering a sales list to a customer, that's always been in the list business. All you had to do was they define the criteria to cut a list. We would cut that list and ship it to the customer. Right? It was simple. And that required a certain technology infrastructure, and we managed with that. Today, you have a user who's doing research on Find the Best, right? When they say find the best hospital, they might be looking for treatment, and so they're looking for Find the Best Hospital, or they might be looking to sell hospital supplies, so they might be looking for Find the Best Hospital as an indicator for how you sell to them. Same thing with salespeople on sugar, right? So the challenge is technology helps, but what helps more is a really good understanding of the needs of that end user, right? Because we have to be able to tailor the technology to serve that need. So the example within a CRM is when someone wants to build a list, it's interesting that we used to sort the list just based on company size. But if you talk to a salesperson, they'll tell you that that's just useless information, right? What's relevant to them is how likely this company is to buy my product. That requires technology, it requires analytics, it requires a good understanding of the customer. So with technology has also come the requirement to understand those other dimensions before you can deliver a solution. And cutting a list was just way easier.
Back in the good old days. Are there any questions before we move on?
I was going to go real quick about something sort of abstracting out like the definition of a list and more of cohort analysis, right? So like, is that what you guys are integrating primarily in Dun & Bradstreet? Like, so, or maybe even with Sugar, like if I'm utilizing Sugar, or utilizing Dun & Bradstreet through Sugar, like having the ability to checkbox criteria and create lists on the fly as opposed to getting a stock list that may have nothing to do with what I'm looking for. Is that ultimately what you're talking to or what you're going to?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
So I'll talk to the first one, and then maybe Julian can say a little bit about it. Right? So our data, our primary asset, the data asset, is built based on some cohort feedback, some user feedback, and community feedback. That's how the data asset's always been built, right? We never create a data point without getting a user experience, not user experience, a business experience across two business entities. And that's what creates that business entity. The second piece you're referring to is how do you actually surface that? One is just simple, and the simplest example is search criteria, right? They build a list using search criteria. The point I was referring to is more, can we deliver a little more intelligence based on who the user is, what industry they represent, and then what industry they're looking at, right? So we can deliver analytics capabilities that tell you whether a company is poised for growth or poised for decline. And that's an important data point, or it's a data point for consideration when you're a salesperson looking to do business with that company.
Right, and I mean, quite literally, taking build a list from D&B surfaced in Sugar, humans can crunch this stuff in their head to a certain degree, right? 3, 5, 7 points. We don't need to know anything about sales rep. They are a person in sales. They are trying to make money. Okay, that's bottom of the barrel. Let's say you've got 3 to 5 columns of information about a company. A little bit of filtering, a little bit of searching. As soon as it gets a little bit more complicated than that, one of two things are going to happen. They're either going to give up and just take what we give them, and they're going to ultimately be less happy with that. Or two, they're going to say, where's the export button so I can jump into Excel, right? So it's iterative in terms of the more you know about them, the more that they know, providing the data in the first place about the person, the team, the company, right, their targets, where they are in their sales cycle. It might be very different in the last 3 weeks of a quarter, what somebody's looking for versus the first 3 weeks of a quarter, right? They might need a quick win. There's really no end to it, right? And another important part to highlight is keeping track of what happened automatically. So let's say I build a list, I get that, it's efficiently, easy, imported, and now we send out a campaign or we do an email blast or I start calling the right people. Being able to track, okay, that criteria, even though I pulled that list about 6 months ago, and tell you what, versus the one that I pulled last quarter, I closed another 20%, right? Was that entirely due to how I tweaked that? No, but did it have something to do with it? Absolutely. And so it's a 360 cycle. Yeah.
Was there another question?
Yes, I have a question about how you define data quality, because we talked about it without a definition.
Very fair point. Anybody want to?
So quality is accuracy, freshness, comprehensiveness, context. I think those are the things that we actually we measure, and we have a score for every data point at Find the Best based on those things.
So similar dimensions: accuracy, completeness, timeliness, and consistency. Repeatability is an important data point, right? So your ability to uniquely and unambiguously surface the same data point 2 times in a row, as simple as it sounds, it's hard when you're dealing with billions of data points, right? The context is also important because the user's tolerance level or threshold for what they will accept is different based on the use case, right? So if I'm looking to extend credit or lend money to someone, I want bulletproof data, right? Just it has to be accurate. If I'm looking to prospect in a broad universe of or a territory, then I have a slightly lower threshold of data points or high quality.
And I'll follow. They got it. But what I'll do is just
Good job.
the first 3 or 4 that they mentioned, those are things that we programmatically figured out a little while ago, and you just have to keep on it in terms of accuracy, timeliness, etc. I think the wave of the future, to use the big buzz phrase, it's context. At least for my industry, it's really context. It's knowing what's going on, picking the right good stuff based on the other areas of focus that we have, putting it right there in front of you.
I think also kind of just to keep answering the question, it's also about how you showcase that data point, because and that's very kind of use case specific, right? So for example, we spent a lot of time debating: do I show horsepower or do I do an adjusted horsepower metric for this use case? Do I show total revenue or do I show profitability? What's the correct metric to specifically tailored to this use case, and how do I show that in the most helpful way? That's why I find the best we spend a lot of time defining taxonomy for a new topic. That's actually how we start any new topics. We think, what makes a house a house? What makes a dinosaur a dinosaur? What are the various columns and rows, and how would someone want to understand a dinosaur? And then massaging the data to fit to that taxonomy that's most helpful.
Just one more thing I'll add to that. You said rows and columns, I figured off the top, is we've traditionally always defined it as rows and columns, right? So it was sufficient descriptors to, or we believed it was a sufficient descriptor to describe a company. There's some interesting challenges. If you're in the manufacturing business and you have labor problems, it's understood. It's expected in some ways, right? If you're in the software industry and you're a small startup and you have labor problems, that's an anomaly. How do you capture that as a data point? Right? It's so semantic content, editorial content is also becoming important, and that makes it much harder to curate, right? Much harder to maintain that information, that kind of information.
But sometimes you can do that algorithmically. So that's actually we try and do that a lot. For example, in our real estate product, we show a house's disaster risk, and so we'll say in San Francisco, 1625 Post Street has a very high risk for earthquake, which is not particularly atypical, right? I mean, we're all in San Francisco right now, so just to let you guys know, in case you didn't know, we're all at a very high risk for earthquake. Whereas, you go to some places on, Florida Keys, and we'll look at a house that's at an incredibly high risk for flood, and it's actually atypically high because it's on the ocean. If you move 2 blocks up the street, the flood risk goes down, by orders of magnitude. And so what we try and do is we'll take a pivot. For example, we're working on labor violations right now, actually, at Find the Best, where we'll say, this company's in the manufacturing industry. It has 40 labor violation suits against it over the last 10 years. That's actually small for this industry and for this size of company. But for a restaurant or for a software company, the fact that it has 3 is actually incredibly high. So we try and algorithmically create that context and write it in human readable format. So we actually write a sentence that explains it to people, which is very, very, very helpful. We developed a lot of technology called narrative technology, basically to tell a story from the data.
I think we should score her question very highly based on one.
I meant to do this.
Definitely. Great. Any other questions?
I have 2, one for Julian, one for Alex. So Julian, you mentioned you have a feedback mechanism for the intelligence pane.
For the application in general. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we're going to extend that to the dashboard pane as well. And the reason why I asked is because if we're using the integration and maybe there might be some inaccuracies in the data, it would feed back to the user.
Exactly right. So the next step for feedback, and we do have this spec'd out, but roadmap. Right now, it's the general menu feedback. Pull it down. We don't send much context back to what the person was doing. We want to make that much more specific. Even if you get to it from the same place, we want to be able to know which page you were on, what you were doing before that, what you were mouse over, what you clicked right before you went, and send me an angry email. So step 2. Yeah, that's exactly right.
And then for Alex, so your product's primarily geared towards research. When I take a look at Google, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, they were just a research engine, right? And now, they're really focused on task completion. So when I use Google now, tell me what flights are coming up for me, which is the context portion of it, as well as some of the products that I've been researching online. So to me, it seems like the next natural step would be to actually make some of that information actionable. So task completion, I think, is something that's pretty valuable in a research product.
Yeah, so we always have, whenever possible, we always have task completion, right? So you like this phone? Buy it here. You want to go to the city? Book this flight. That stuff's actually relatively easy to figure out. Actually, I would disagree with you, though. I don't think Google has been in the research business until recently. I think they've been in the search business. Google's really great at, there's trillions and trillions of web documents. How do I find the needle in the haystack that points me to the correct page on the internet? They're now deciding what they're seeing is a lot of their market share is actually getting taken from vertical search sites like Zillow and like us, and that's that's the most valuable search content because people don't just want a page of links. They want tools, data, context, which is why you've seen them introduce their knowledge graph product and start putting those things in the search results. So I think they're just getting into the research business. The task completion stuff it's important, right? That's how we make money, but it's actually pretty easy usually.
Does task completion have any? Are you completely objective? Does task completion have any play into where somebody is found, or you know what I mean?
It's incredibly important that we be objective.
Yeah.
Especially when we do any kind of ranking. As a big motivation for the site was our CEO was looking for the best college, and he found a top 10 list, and every item in that top 10 list was University of Phoenix, University of Phoenix, University of Phoenix. And so we don't like. No one likes to go to an affiliate shell site where it's basically pay to play. So we don't do that. We try and be very, very objective. It's sometimes expensive to be objective, but it's how we get 27 million people a month on the site.
It goes back to the trust question.
So I said the same thing. It's trust. As a content provider, trust is foundational. Right? If you cannot establish trust with your end users, it will be extraordinarily difficult for them to consume your information.
Any other questions?
A question. This is related to the builder list. Do you guys offer recommended search criteria for newbies or people who don't know what they want to do, don't know the filter criteria? Do you guys offer that kind of feature?
So to start with, excellent suggestion, but not yet. The idea is it'll be based on 2 things, though. What you mentioned is definitely step 1 of taking common slices of what people would want to look for and saying, hey, start here, if you haven't used this before. But secondarily, it's more what I mentioned about that 360 life cycle of you used it once, what happened, right? And using that to guide you next time. reminding you, hey, remember, you did this 3 months ago. This is what seemed to happen with those 150 targets or prospects that you pulled down. Would you consider maybe based on a new reality now, 3 months later, new context of where you are and what happened, a combination of those three, you might want to consider tweaking this or trying that.
And that kind of feedback is very valuable. That what worked before, what should I tweak, and
Right.
that suggestion I think will be a good add-on.
Exactly. Yeah, step one is human intelligence because we still have that. So at least putting the raw content in front of them to a degree to let them, remind them, let them think, easily see, go, huh, yeah. And step two is really figuring out how to, algorithmize that one.
Okay, and this question may be, why the name Sugar CRM? Was that a name, and why is it that?
So.
Sorry, I have that.
No, it's fair. I've been at the company since it began. I was the first person they hired, the 3 co-founders, and so they had a fake story for a while, but the real story is that it was the name of the CEO's mountain bike, and he dreamed up the idea while on some ride up in the sky, and he called his mountain bike Sugar. Yeah, he got back down and screamed from the rooftops. And I got a job, so.
You heard it.
Yeah, I'll take it. First tagline, though, was, "It's a sweet deal." No, you don't want anymore.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Great, so let's move along here. Now we're going to move into how customers consume. How do each of you think about paid versus free content, and what models do you use?
I should start? Okay. So paid versus free, I'll keep this answer pretty simple. Again, in our industry, businesses are willing to pay for the good stuff. Even if they're in a more B2C model, right, where they're selling to thousands or even millions, hundreds of thousands, rather than a B2B model where they would definitely pay, right? But what we've found is that because of the state of business data, its availability and its trust factor, it's getting better, but 5 years ago it was relatively non-existent or a pain to get through. So right now, the right kinds of rates that seem to keep businesses like D&B in business, I see no problem with business type data being paid for. The rest of it already is free and will continue to be because the rest of what we're trying to use is data that you already have in your own warehouses, in your own company, and data that's already in the CRM. So paying for good content, for fresh content to be updated, I haven't noticed any problems with that.
Great.
So I'll add that. There's value. It's where is value created. To the extent we're delivering value to the end user or the customer, we have the ability to charge for the content. Right? And that might be a phased approach where phase one is the low value content, and then that you're not monetizing or partially monetizing, and then phase two is the high value content that you monetize. Right? If you're, I use the example of, do you want to do business with this company? Do you want to lend money to someone? You're willing to pay for that answer, right? Because the cost of not having access to that information outweighs the cost of paying to buy that information. It's insurance. So there's always value in, to the extent you can add context, to the extent you can add experience, to the extent you can add, all of those drive value creation, which means there is monetization. And sometimes upstream in that process, you might have to have free content, right, as the first step towards getting customers into a paid model.
So all of our content right now is free, which is often surprising because we have topics that some of our competitors charge thousands of dollars a month to get the exact same content. So for example, we launched a government contractors topic where you can research all federal government spending and who's winning that spending and how much they're getting paid for which products and services. And so part of that is because we offer the information for free because we're lucky because it's pretty inexpensive for us to actually create a new topic because we've got great technology. But Also, the cost that a lot of consumers and even businesses are willing to pay for content and for information is quickly approaching zero in a lot of topics. And so there's more information that's being created, there's more information that's available online, and so we're often competing with free. And so how people pay us is through their purchase intent, right? They come to our site, and we're not going to charge them to look at our cars topic, but that they are comparing 5 cars is actually pretty valuable to an advertiser. So they pay us with purchase intent. Now there's some things too where we'll pass people along for additional value. So for example, we provide a lot of customer data and a lot of company data on our company research product. It's from Dun & Bradstreet. Now, if someone wants to know the creditworthiness of that business, if they want to know the probability that business will go out of business in the next 90 days, we're happy to pass them on to Dun & Bradstreet to go buy a credit report or to sign up for a premium account. And so we're just trying to create that divide. We're actually pushing more and more information to free because it's how much consumers are willing to pay for it. And then if they want the really fancy stuff that Bimble was talking about, they can certainly go buy that from a partner. And hopefully we'll make some money when they do, which we do.
Great. So we have time for probably one more question. So let's talk about trends in content. So what trend in content is most exciting to you as you look out into the future?
So I'll go first. There's we spoke about context quite a bit. There's when we think of data or content, we think of foundational identity data, and then the next step is behavioral data, which comes from just attributes that define that entity. And then the third one, which is the most interesting, is predictive information. Right? So we use this framework to explain this. Is I see you, I know you, I can predict your behavior. Right? The part that makes it really interesting is where you can predict the behavior of an entity, whether that entity is a company or an individual. So Alex mentioned purchase intent. That's where value is created. Right? That's the most interesting thing. These high-value analytic solutions are what makes content interesting.
Great.
So I think on the consumer side, we're seeing a transformation from directories, search, and vertical search to research. So that's why I actually brought that comment up. Vertical search sites like Zillow, Trulia, CNET, they're beginning to realize that providing content about a house and just the stats on that house is not enough. Right? You need information about the public schools. You need information about weather, and so you need to draw from breadth, a broad array of content, and service that at that particular use case. And then search engine sites are realizing that search is getting kind of boring. Right? Search it's not dead. It's always going to be important, but the real high value moments are when you can provide research. So they're starting to introduce new content to the search results page, new tools and new functionality. So we think it's interesting. We see everyone kind of sprinting in this one direction that we're calling the research engine space. So it's exciting to be a company in that space. That's why we're there. That's where all the value is getting created.
Right. What is exciting me most is really the potential, because imagine something surfaced in your CRM, lead score of 97 versus 96. You have time to make one phone call. Just really take a second and think about the mountain of information and processing that may, when we get there, have gone into why that one is 1 point higher than the other and the amount of difference that can actually make in somebody's life. We are talking about sales here, right? But at the same time, there's no reason this technology can't be put to use in things outside of CRM in terms of healthcare, right? We've been speaking with people like IBM around what they're doing with Watson now, right? It's not just about winning Jeopardy. Something that can crunch that amount of data, collect that amount of data, and actually put that into any kind of context. I'm just really excited and happy to be a part of that, and to share that opportunity with the two gentlemen over here as well.
Great. Well, that is the end of our panel. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to fill out the survey and take the blue ticket. Thank you, guys.